ערב טוב לכולם, אני דיוויד פלאטו, כאן בסגל למשפטים במחשבים ישראל, אני חלק מהמכון למשפט עברי וראש המכון אצלנו דוקטור בן פורת. עוד מעט אני עובר לאנגלית, אבל בכל זאת משפט ראשון בעברית. אנחנו מתכנסים כאן לאירוע, באמת זה זכות בשבילנו. שיש לנו דיון סביב הספר של פרופ חיים סיימן מווילנובה, שגם מערך אצלנו בפקולטה למשפטים באוניברסיטה העברית עכשיו. יש כיסאות. Okay, I'm going to shift now to English. It's going to be bilingual, although Chaim promised to sprinkle in some Yiddish on occasion. So, I'll just briefly introduce, and then I'm going to really try to get out of the way because we have an all-star cast here. Those who are more familiar with writings about law more generally or Western jurisprudence know some of the great scholarly efforts, let's say in the American Legal Academy since Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, talking about the common law, and Carl Llewellyn talking about what is the nature of law, and into more modern treatments, or I guess mid-20th century treatments of H.L.A. Hart, and then to Dworkin, and even more recently a book like Frederick Schauer, which is a different type of a book, but it's the nature of legal thinking. And they're all trying to put their hands around what is the nature of law, and how can we try to articulate it in a way that's coherent and helpful to understand the phenomena of law. So in a similar sense, there have been fewer efforts to try to do this for Halakhah. Somebody like the late Professor Auerbach, of course, with his classic work on the Halakhah, was one attempt at doing that, but there haven't been many. I'd say actually few altogether, and each one is much more partial in its focus. If you talk about classical Halakhah from the Talmudic period, there have been some recent works of like Moskowitz trying to sort of tackle this from one perspective, Christian Hayes from another perspective, numerous articles of Steve Fraud, and then there have also been some members of the judiciary who've done this, Justice Zilberg, Justice Elon, and others. And of course the task for Halakhah is much more challenging in all sorts of respects. There's less theorizing about it out there. It's also, of course, a sprawling body of work and covering such a long time period. And also just Halakhah is sui generis, and that's really the great challenge. As tough as it is to try to articulate the nature of law, I think it's much more difficult to articulate the nature of Halakhah, and that's really sort of the challenge of Chaim's book, and a question whether one can, and even the methodology Chaim ultimately employs is an interesting one, where he doesn't give one definition, but he talks about a spectrum between two poles. More about that actually more about that right now. So let me tell you what Chaim tries to do, just very briefly. It's a very rich book with a lot of different sections, but the basic working model is to try to think of Halakhah, of Jewish law, but not, so we're going to go back to that term Halakhah, that Halakhah is both Halakhah as regulative, that it regulates our conduct, so in that sense it's more akin to a legal system, but also at the other end of the spectrum is Halakhah as Torah. That's really quite fascinating and almost ironic, because we know that term Torah, when it was translated already from its most early translations into Greek, start to be translated as nomos. So in a work of reverse engineering, Chaim says, well, let's take that nomos and turn it back to Torah. There's something about nomos that is reductive, and it doesn't fully capture the unique nature of Halakhah. So let's think of Halakhah not just as regulative, which is more akin to nomos, but also Halakhah at the other end of the spectrum as Torah. By Torah, we're talking about a spiritual endeavor. We're talking about an educational body of work and also a source of values, deep values around which one constructs one's spiritual life. So that's the, in a very basic sketch, the larger claim, but of course Chaim builds this project through, builds his thesis through dividing his work into 3 parts, and that really is going to be nicely captured tonight in our panel, where we're going to have each panelist talk about a different part of the book. So part 1 of the book deals with the nature of Halakhah, part 2 goes to classical text, Talmudic readings, and part 3 is what Chaim entitles Between Talmud and Law, and not just the headings, but as you'll see, it also really, the first part deals with the phenomenology of Halakhah, trying to develop it. The second part then really tries to build up this idea of not just Halakhah as regulative, but Halakhah as Torah, through its theological and educational dimensions. And the last part is sort of a tour through historical phases, not as a historian, I'll get to that in one more second, but still noting how there's development from Rishonim all the way to the present in the land of Israel of the type of work Halakhah is expected to do. And on the one hand, it is used as a source of regulation, of code, of practice, but on the other hand, it also, especially in the past century or two, has taken on this increasing dimension of Halakhah as the source of spiritual guidance and education, etc. So that's the basic idea of the book. Is that fair? And there's a lot more, and there's a lot more in there that we'll hear about tonight. I guess one last thing just about the method that Chaim pauses in his introduction to make the point that he's not approaching this as a historian, and he's going to limit how much he's going to deal with the context, although he's well aware all of that stuff's important, but that is a different project. His project is to see it from the eyes of a lawyer or a legal thinker, somebody who could theorize about it. And I guess that's almost, I'll stop there, maybe in the questions I'll pose a question about, is there a fixed it? But the it that Chaim's trying to talk about is Halakhah. Both Halakhah, the literary Halakhah, also Halakhah as practice, and also Halakhah as a concept. With that, I'm going to hand off to the panelists. I'll introduce them one by one. But I just want to say one last thing, that you'll see a nice range, a spectrum, like there's a spectrum in the book, there's a spectrum in our panelists, which I think is very fitting for the Machon, because one of the things that we're trying to do here in the Machon Mishpat Ivri is to also include not just Israeli scholars, but American scholars, and also not just legal scholars, but also scholars from Jewish studies and Jewish thought. And we'll see that all represented tonight. So I'm going to begin with calling the Rosh HaMachon, Dr. Porat. I'm going to move it so you can say